Welcome all. Welcome all. How nice to see you here. It's a great pleasure to have you at our birthday party. 10 years with the Core Forum. What I wanted to say that my name is Yvonne Westerlund. I am your host today. I am vice chair and I represent the Central Council of the Jewish communities in Finland. And a quick glance on the program here. So on behalf of us all, I cannot say how happy we are that you, Asakaram, said yes to our invitation to be here with us today. Yeah. So I will just tell you a little about our program, and then Pia will come and speak for us the welcoming words, and then the floor is yours. So also warmly welcome Dr. Mulki Al-Shamani from the University of Helsinki. So you will now be the commentator of the keynote speech afterwards. We will have questions and answers after your comments. And this is now an opportunity for you to ask anything, all the questions you ever wanted to know about this topic. So we have allocated some 30 minutes for these questions and answers. So please use this interactive space for you to learn more. And we have microphones for those who feel that the voice isn't strong enough. So we can help you with that. And also, if you don't hear a question, you don't hear an answer, I'm here to help. So, and if you want, when you want to ask a question, wave. If I don't see you waving, use your voice. It's as easy as that. So yes, where was I? Yeah. So we are then also expecting Mr. Antti Kurvinen, our Minister of Science and Culture. He will be talking on religious literacy, a very, very important topic these days. So be also prepared to ask a few questions about him, about that topic from him directly. And then we will finish off the speeches with Pekka Lindqvist's speak on faith-centered interfaith work. I do look forward to listening to that one. And questions and answers are also on the menu here for today. What else happens? Yes, this is being streamed all the time, except for the intermission when you are having coffee and cinnamon buns. I could already feel the smell of them down there somewhere. I guess you did too. And then after the coffee break, we are having a panel discussion. 5 people, and I am also taking part of that. So my role is a bit double here. And we will be discussing moving towards peace and human rights in religions, which is a very large topic. Let's see what happens, where we land. So, but anyways, thank you for now, and Pia, please.
On. Okay. Peace be with you all. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my warm welcome to you in behalf of the National Forum for Cooperation of Religions in Finland to this 10th anniversary seminar. I am so glad to see you all here on person, because so many online meetings after online meetings, so it's really lifting to be here, seeing you all together in face. So I'm happy about this one. I have to extend my special thanks also to Professor Asakaram. Thank you very much. and other speakers to honoring us with your presence today, to mark our anniversary, and to give your contribution, which we are looking forward to hear. I like also to thank and give appreciation to all of the people who has been making this possible, this event, our personnel, our board members, and also the organization committee. Thank you very much for making it possible. Okay, 10 years of cooperation. I think it has been actually more than 10 years because CORE-Forum, it started already its activities around 2008, 2009. Already we had made some statements and meetings and participations, so this is just the official 10 years anniversary. And of course, if it was not the good cooperation between different religions before this establishment of CORE-Forum, I think we wouldn't come to this result what we have today, because already from 1990s we have had very good cooperation between different religions in Finland. So this is very important, and it is also leading in the end to the establishment of CORE. Yeah. Anyway, I don't talk that much about history, enough about it, because there is other speakers in the podium who can come to talk about the history later on in the evening. But I still want to maybe extend my thanks to the founders of Forum, because we have also some members of who has been active in the beginning of the Forum, so I would like to extend my thanks to them, and also maybe to hear about them later in the program. But more than history, I think I want to tell you about the importance of the CORE-Forum for the society, and especially for the different religions in Finland. I think we are unique as CORE-Forum because we are really multi-religious actor in a way that when we are choosing our boards, we have a democratic way to choose, and everybody is taken equally into part. So this one, it respects all of us in equally. So this is very important when we are building the future of religious cooperation. And it gives good ground for it, because when you have feeling of participation, and you have feeling of ownership of this forum, so it does give you really more possibilities to work for it. And to be also productive and sustainable in our work, because then if we are like following only one religion and others they are just following, I think we don't come to the same result. Why this one anyway it is important, especially today when we look the polarization that it is increasing, especially in political environment is hardening, especially towards, I will say, foreign religions, because always some religions are taking not Finnish or maybe European. I try this one. I don't know from where it's coming. Okay. Do we have technical? Okay, maybe it did finish now. You can take it, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know, because it is really hardening the environment, political environment. So as a religious leaders and as religious actors, it's very important that we work towards societal peace, and we work for these issues together to show also to political leaders that we need to have, that we have the voice, and we are part of this society, and we have also soft I say, these soft ideas about the life and about people, so we can all together affect on them and their behaving even, and also affect maybe for them to make more humane politics. So I think this is very important, that we bring the humane way of thinking to politics. I think we have succeeded in this. As we cooperate with the public authorities, act as an expert in religious matters, and we participate in social dialogue and organize various events. In all our work, we promote the visible role of religions in everyday life and the visibility of religions representatives as active social participant. In this, I must thank our expert commissions, which are providing their expertise to make all this possible. Very important to make different events with expertise. So this is, I thank really much for our commissions, different commissions. Even for current issues, we had the peace walk. So the theme of it was climate change. So we talked from the religious point of views about the climate change. And of course, which it did touch us all, it's the pandemic. So this is one of the issues we have been tackled from the societal point, that bring in the ideas of the religious leaders, that what they think about, for example, vaccinations and things like that. So it's very important to take part in the discussion in the society. Another aspect I want to mention to you, during the years of working together in this forum, we are not only working together as organizations or as just like because we have to, but we become friends. We became friends. We can share also some private issues with each other, and I would like this one to be more spread to grassroots levels also, that different religious people, they can participate to each other's feasts, and they can talk to each other, and they can be friends together. And nobody needs to be threatened by the other, feeling that the other is superior than the other. So I think this is one of the lessons learned in the core forum. Of course, to accomplish this all, we need to increase religious literacy. And the best way to do it, it is to work together as an example. And as a core forum, I do think that we are even very good example, even internationally, to be spread around the world. I have been traveling and going to some, participating to some like different dialogue meetings, and actually many times the leader of some organization, it is only one religion and others are following. So this is one of the issues I think we have even product here to take forward outside even from Finland, to tell to people about how we did manage to do it in Finland. Thanks again for participating, and I hope you enjoy the seminar program, the food, and the company of others. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Pia, for this. And now we are giving the floor to Assakaram, please. I'll get you some water here.
So, Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace be upon all of you. I don't really like these very much because it feels like an Oprah Winfrey moment, which this definitely should not be. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you here today. I'm very grateful to the organizers for seeing me, acknowledging me, and honoring me in this way, that I can be with you on such a critical and important anniversary. Thank you very much for this. Really? Oh, is this better? Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. That was all I had said. Thank you. Haven't started yet. So, just to say that I think the work of religion and interreligious engagement is still too low.
It should be on constantly.
Right. So I grew up in a culture where we were not supposed to speak too loudly as women. So I apologize for that handicap. It might be going on for a while. I will do my best to speak louder into the microphone. Where I come from, there's usually 5 prayers a day, and each time the mosque will announce the adhan, the prayer, and then when you have several mosques in one neighborhood, it can be a genuine cacophony. So actually, and they always say it out loud into a microphone. So I'm quite encouraged by this. You're not getting bothered, I hope, yet. So, great privilege to be here. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to share with you that before I go into what I wanted to share today about human rights and the connection between human rights and faith and the work we do in this context, I wanted to share that it's almost impossible to work in the religious space, whatever that space is, without a remarkable amount of passion. And there are different kinds of passion. There's obviously the passion for the faith itself that is inspired by the faith itself. But there is also, in the interreligious space, there is the passion for learning about other religions, other faith traditions. With the interest and engagement increasingly shown by certain governments in this religious space comes another kind of passion, which I think is very critical for us to be aware of, which is the passion for intelligence about the communities. What is it that these communities are doing, saying, thinking, and why? And we can read the increased interest by different governments around the world in the area of religious and interreligious engagement as a coming of age of this passion for community knowledge, community intelligence, community engagement, and participation. We can read it as that. We can also read it as a really, really problematic dynamic that is unfolding, because it is also happening at the same time that most governments in many parts of the world are struggling with a crisis of legitimacy for themselves as governance mechanisms, but also for the rest of the civil society institutions. We're living in a moment where institutions are struggling to be credible and legitimate and inclusive and above all, accountable. So given that we are living in a moment where there's a struggle for political accountability, to see a rise in interest in religion and religious engagement should be seen as a positive sign, but also a sign of caution, wariness. I serve an organization called Religions for Peace, and the more I hear about CORE, the more I wonder why CORE isn't part of Religions for Peace, because it's all about creating interreligious councils and nurturing and sustaining interreligious collaboration. 50 years ago, a whole group of religious leaders from around the world representing different faith traditions, because it's not just the 3, it's all faith traditions, came together, I believe it was in Kyoto, with the clear mandate and understanding. At that time, 50 years ago, they were very concerned about the climate of war and the narrative and rhetoric of conflict that at that time was considered very problematic. And it was, what's happening? The United Nations isn't able to fulfill its key mandate of making sure no nation shall take up weapon against another nation. Clearly that was not succeeding, and the nuclear war was very much part of this consciousness. 50 years later, nuclearization, forget the word, in addition to climate change, in addition to a rampant case of conflict, is pointing to the fact that, if anything, the need for multilateral mechanisms, not just governmental, but also civil society, but also religious, that need is even more today than it was 50 years ago, okay? When these religious leaders met, they made it very clear that this has to be a space that is exactly like the United Nations. Meaning what? Meaning that just as the United Nations has governments represented, and the governments will send their representative to serve the mission or the embassy, then Religions for Peace also had to have multi-religious institutions represented. So the religious institution itself has to sit on the table and send their nominations. So to that end, the board I serve is a board of religious leaders or faith leaders, each of whom represent formally and are elected to represent formally their different religious institutions and faith communities, which makes for a very interesting dynamic indeed. If you thought the United Nations was tough, join one of our board meetings. One of the key determinants 50 years ago was that this multi-religious space has to be committed to peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development, which is exactly the same three pillars of the United Nations' own commitment and engagement. So from a very early founding moment, the commitment was to those three areas. But more than that, the commitment was also to serve this mandate of interreligious collaboration to realize sustainable and equitable development, to realize human rights, and to realize peace and security in the most holistic sense, that this had to be done systematically, multi-religiously. Because working within the one religious institution, no matter how large or how global it is simply not sufficient. It is great, it is wonderful, it is necessary, but it is insufficient. A lot like legislation. Legislation is absolutely essential, very, very necessary, but it's not sufficient. Okay? We all know that. Laws are wonderful, we have to have them, but laws on their own don't change much. What has happened over the last 50 years is that the commitment to peace and security and the commitment to sustainable development and the commitment to human rights have been working in tandem at the Interreligious Council level, and it does not only happen at the global, but at the regional and at the local level. So to that end, Religions for Peace has been able to foster, support, and to continue to consolidate interreligious councils in over 90 countries. Now, you should ask, well, why hasn't that brought world peace? If we've got all these interreligious councils and they're working together and they're doing wonderful work, by the way, together on all these different areas, how come we're not at peace? And the answer to this is that because for exactly the same reason that the United Nations has not secured peace for the world. Because institutions, especially governance-related institutions, are facing a crisis, so therefore it's very awkward to be able to get them to work together. It's already challenging enough to get one government to work synergistically and to be accountable. Imagine when you have 193 governments. But if you extend that logic, you'll also understand that religious institutions, which are much, much, much older than the oldest government we know, the religious institutions themselves perhaps may even be the architects of going it alone and trying to figure it out on their own. So the very same reason why multilateral institutions like the United Nations are struggling with their mandate of peacemaking, for the very same reasons multi-religious institutions are struggling with the mandate of peacemaking. At the core of this struggle for legitimacy, for institutional legitimacy, is a struggle to work collaboratively. And you cannot realize sustainable development, you cannot realize peace and security, and you certainly cannot realize human rights if you're working in a competitive context, wanting to be the one person or the one institution to dominate. And this is precisely the point that I often share with our Catholic brethren and some of our Sunni Muslim brethren, which they don't really like to hear, is how multi-religiously do you work? Do you work multi-religiously? Or do you work from and within and for your specific community and institution? One of the many reasons I'm delighted to be with you here today is because your government, irrespective of the political party in power, has been one of the foremost, if not the foremost, in the European Union space to actually actively support multi-religious collaboration, and indeed to support the formation through FCA of what I think is a very cutting-edge network, the network of religious and traditional peacemakers, of which Dr. Mohammed al-Sanusi is the executive director and sitting right there. So to see a government committed, as I said, is a very positive sign. To be able to see it committed to multi-religious engagement, is a very strategic sign. one of the most serious collateral damage that has been happening over the last few years as a result of all these different political tensions, climate-related, financial-related, now public health-related, one of the collateral damage is human rights. It's become a threatened species. With the COVID as an incumbent, as an added pressure, we have noticed, we used to speak before COVID of a shrinking civil society space. Now, in times of COVID, we know that some of the most authoritarian regimes around the world are using the COVID dynamics as an opportunity to extend the power of oppression and suppression. So over the last 2 years, you would have thought that governments would have been so busy trying to cope with the public health disaster that it would have been simply a matter of focusing and zeroing in on collaborating more with one another, making sure that their own religious and other secular communities are at peace with one another. On the contrary, we've actually seen a heightened set of tensions and more coups in the last couple of years than in the 2 years before that. So clearly, we are seeing a move towards more authoritarianism in the name, of course, of public health and safety. Right? So we have to keep the order, we have to maintain order, and even if that means taking force by power, it's to maintain order, it's the best thing for people's health. Right? That logic is quintessentially an anti-human rights logic. It's the exact opposite of what it is that we're supposed to be. We're supposed to have disagreements. We must have dissonance. Conflict is not all bad. It is required for us to, even internally within our souls, to be at conflict is also an opportunity for us to get to know ourselves better. Right? Why then are we living in a moment where, as multi-religious actors, no matter who we are, individuals or institutional, why is it becoming so incredibly important to understand that human rights is the tipping point for peace? Why? Precisely because when these authoritarian tendencies, and they are not only in governments, by the way. These authoritarian tendencies are in almost all our institutions. When these authoritarian tendencies dominate, they are also inversely related to the respect for human rights. More authoritarianism, lack of human rights. More corrupt institutions, therefore more challenge and in holding accountable these institutions to the human rights agenda. It's actually not complicated, and it's a pretty simple thing, but it bears highlighting. But human rights themselves are really, really fascinating if you think about it. If we didn't have religion, we wouldn't have had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In fact, in order to arrive at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, religious communities, groups, representatives, leaders had to be solicited and engaged. The Human Rights Declaration in and of itself is based on the values common to what? To each and every faith tradition. It's not as if we have religions and then we have human rights. We wouldn't have had human rights if we had not harvested the most common aspects of all our faith traditions. So in fact, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is built on that which is sacred to every single believer and faith tradition. That's actually what it's based on. Now, it gets plenty bad rep, as the Americans would say. It's a Western invention, it's a Western document. Who needs it? If we have our Holy Quran or if we have our Bible, we don't need human rights. So the fact is, you need it because you're looking at the multiplicity of faith, the diversity that is there, ethnic, religious, racial, gendered, that it's precisely because of the diversities that we live in and that we exemplify that we actually do need that common framework. Because that framework is common to all our values. It is built on that which is common to all our values. So that's why human rights matters today, and that's why human rights has to matter to religious actors as well. Very often we are led to, if you listen to some of the actors, or to some of the discourse of those who are most fundamental in their understanding of religion, very often we see that that fundamentalist understanding and interpretation is not based on different religious coming together and working. It's based on specific religious groups. The discourse of fundamentalism demands conformity the discourse of human rights demands diversity. And if we are genuinely believing in the idea of human rights, then we must, per definition, as actors, as faith actors, be committed to holding on and supporting and defending human rights. If you don't support and defend human rights, you're actually not being true to the values of your own faith tradition, no matter what they are. No matter what they are. Those who try to argue for separation, for uniqueness, for distinction, have every right to do so. But at the end of the day, if we believe in the diversity of our creation, we have to defend the criticality of the human rights mandate. Okay, so very, very briefly, let me just share with you a little bit about international development, humanitarian, and human rights realities. Some of the themes that have emerged in the last few years is that if we want human rights to dominate, and we want the accountability for human rights to be a feature of our governance architecture, we have to work multi-religiously. It's not good enough to work with one religious institution, even if it is the dominant religious institution. I remember this was a conversation within the United Nations in the early years, in 2007, where a United Nations office would say, we are in country X, the majority is Christian, it's Catholic, so we work with the Catholics. This is the way it is. And the counterpoint to that was, well, you're not only defending the human rights of Catholics, are you? And if you're supposed to be accountable for the human rights of everybody in that society, then you, of course, have to work with the governments, but you actually really have to work with all religious traditions. You have to have them all represented. One of the things I appreciate most about Religions for Peace is that when all the faith leaders come together, it's not about who's the majority, who's the minority, and it's never about who has the best religion or who is closest to God. But that table that convenes all the faiths together, is also perhaps the only table that we have in our common planet that can make sure that there is a balance between the different faith traditions, which in and of itself is a critical hallmark of building a peaceful coexistence. So, building peaceful, just society and inclusive societies demands not only religious engagement, we're way beyond that. It demands multi-religious collaboration. Everybody who's worked in this space will tell you, and I therefore enjoyed very much hearing what you had to say. Everybody will say, but we're working already so much, we're serving our community, we're serving everybody. So I do, I'm a Protestant, but I work in a Protestant organization, I'm serving everybody. Or I'm a Sunni Muslim, I'm working in a Sunni Muslim entity, but I'm serving everybody, which is true, by the way. Most of the religious humanitarian organizations serve everybody. And that's the principle of international humanitarian law. You can't be serving only one particular community. So when COVID happened, the first response was all the faith communities increased their work, because they're the original humanitarian responders, they all increased their work 110%. Every single religious institution and establishment increased its work 100%, sorry. And the question became, but they're not working together. So we know that these different religious institutions are working to the nth degree to serve everyone, but why are they not working together is the question. And I think here's where we understand, or we should be trying to understand, how valuable it is to distinguish between religious engagement and multi-religious collaboration. Now we can talk about multi-religious collaboration from here to kingdom come. It's fine, it's topical, it's interesting, it's relevant. But what makes it possible? What makes it possible is what you referred to. It is to actually serve a common issue concretely. Now the irony, of course, is that COVID is that one common issue. It's a disaster. It's a global public health and every other way disaster. Climate change is a disaster globally. These are also incredible opportunities. They are the litmus test of our commitment to democratic accountability and human rights. But they are also golden moments for us to serve concretely together. The accountability that we demand of our governments has to be the same accountability that we demand of our religious institutions. It's not that it's different. Just because it's a religious institution, we deal with it differently. We hold it accountable differently. No. A religious institution is a government mechanism. and our government is a governance mechanism. Both have to be held accountable by the same criteria. In many instances, we see now, in multilateral spaces, we see a lot of civil society actors, including religious actors, who point the finger at governments rightly, and you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not. Great. How many are pointing the finger at themselves to hold themselves accountable for what they are not doing? How many of our religious institutions, not just churches, mosques, synagogues, I'm talking even about religious FBOs, faith-based organizations, faith-based NGOs, how many of them are actually coming together to hold themselves accountable to what they are not doing with one another, with other religious communities and organizations, with other human rights-oriented actors? How many partnerships do we see around the world that are multi-religious and secular for human rights? Can somebody mention one example that might come to your mind? Any partnership on a human rights initiative effort that brings together multi-religious with secular civil society. By the way, there are some, but the fact that it's taking you all a while to figure it out shows us that there's an issue of resonance. There's an issue of this being common mainstream knowledge. It isn't common mainstream knowledge, not because it's not happening at all, but because it's not happening enough. Okay? So here's our claim to accountability. We are civil society actors, all of us, if we're not in government. If we're civil society actors, how many multi-religious initiatives, as secular civil society activists, how many multi-religious initiatives are we aware of that we're actually actively collaborating for and with? Those are the kinds of questions related to accountability that we need to be asking ourselves, that we need to be asking religious institutions, religious leaders, and other groups in society. But we need to ask the same question of the secular civil society actors as well. Are you working with religious organizations and institutions? Are you working with many of them? Or are you just working with one or two? Well, yeah, we're working with the Catholic Church, we're working with the Protestant Church, that's grand. Is it only Catholics and Protestants in your country? No, we have a few others. And where are they? Well, they're a minority. We don't know, right? When it's honest. Our challenge of accountability is not simply a matter of building religious institutions and building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. The challenge of accountability is the challenge that we hold ourselves for, actually, those of us who believe, as believers. If we are believing, ultimately, in whatever truth, whatever that truth may be, but if we believe in a truth, then we have to believe in the fact that the diversity which is us has to be cohesive in delivering on that truth. There is no such thing as only serving one religious community at a time. There's also no such thing as only partnering with one religious institution only. What we have to hold ourselves accountable to, that we hold our governments accountable to, is how they're managing the diversity of people, institutions, and mechanisms. Religious institutions traditionally are the oldest governance, social service, human rights, and humanitarian mechanisms known to humankind. So all this other stuff we hear and see today, they're new. We're all new, kids on the block, right? The oldest social service providers and humanitarian actors and governors are the religious sector. When Religions for Peace hosted its, I believe it was its 10th World Assembly, the intersection of faith and diplomacy became a very important nugget in this relationship. One of the lessons learned from that relationship is that it was articulated by a couple of religious leaders very powerfully. They were looking at the diplomats, the secular diplomats from foreign affairs ministries, and they were saying, you think you are diplomats? Well, guess what? Before your ministries were created, we religious leaders have been doing diplomacy for centuries. The oldest diplomacy that we know is actually the diplomacy that took place between different religious institutions and different religious actors. They're the original diplomat. They did a very good job. One of the things that we have to realize is that diplomacy, which is the art, ostensibly the art of preventing conflict or handling conflict, is actually the art that religious actors and religious institutions in particular are the owners of, are the instigators of. You will have heard of the different empires that used to exist in just this small part of the world. These different empires had a religious basis, justification, existence, and they had to deal with each other. And very often they didn't do a very fine job of it. The point here being that we have an imperative at this moment in time to reconsider the human rights as our tipping point for building just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, and building a just, peaceful, and inclusive planet. Because guess what? If you listen to some of the discussions and the narrative of indigenous peoples in different parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, for them the sacred, and they are very diverse by the way, I do not mean to essentialize them, but for most indigenous traditions, if not all of them, the sacred is the land, the water, the very things that today we know to be seriously threatened by climate change. If the sacred to this community is this earth, then respecting and collaborating and serving together alongside them is the way we will save our earth. So it's not a far-fetched idea about we have religious institutions working together on climate change, which is the way that we are also looking at the political space. If you listen to some of the coverage of the COP, it's all about the, who's coming together to talk about the climate and so on and so forth. That's very fine, it's wonderful, it's necessary. But at the end of the day, we must understand that inclusivity of faiths, not only by name, but actually in action of serving together, that inclusivity of faiths working together to serve is the way that we will ultimately save our environment. Because it's about changing attitudes, behaviors, norms, as well as legal frameworks to help us ultimately save the air, the water, and the land that we need to live on. So the safeguarding of human rights is not about excluding the environment. The safeguarding of human rights, which must be the space where all faiths and all other civil society actors come to serve, that safeguarding of human rights is the way that we will safeguard our planet too. It's not like multiple directions. You're either going to do multi-religious engagement or you're going to do environmental dynamics. It's actually one and the same. So human rights is the tipping point for so much of our imperative of building just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, and by extension, also the imperative of saving our environment. It's as simple as that. Very quickly, some of the lessons that we've learned in the last 50 years that have been brought into particularly sharp focus by the COVID and the combined COVID and climate change challenges. One, the languages that we tend to speak. Effectively, we think that secular actors are the only ones who speak human rights. That's not true. Because if we've just maintained that human rights are the common values to all faith traditions, then there are many people who speak that language, including religious actors too. To say that religion is opposed to human rights is an incredible myopia. It does not appreciate that so much of the values that we are fighting for today are actually faith-based and faith-inspired values. We also know that if we keep working as we are doing now on allowing or working with only specific religious institutions or only specific religious actors, that is absolutely necessary, but it is deeply insufficient. The multi-religious engagement is the tipping point for safeguarding human rights, which in turn is the tipping point for safeguarding our environment. And last but by no means least, in this incredible interest, this moment of intensity of interest in religion, that governments and non-governmental organizations and intergovernmental organizations alike are manifesting. I end with my first point, that in this moment of tremendous interest in religion is also the moment of tremendous potential dissonance among the religious. Because we are not looking multi-religiously. We are not looking to include all as equals around the one table of civil society. We are actually tearing civil society apart by only looking and seeing and collaborating with one religious community or on one religious institution at a time. What we need are more spaces that bring together religious institutions. We don't need to reinvent a wheel about how we work together religiously. As again, remember that diplomacy was the original art of interreligious coexistence. We don't need to reinvent the wheel about how religions coexist. What we need to do is to be much more deliberate in how we work with religious actors to integrate them into the civic space, because the civil society space holds religious actors as any other political actors accountable. Religious actors try to say, we're unique. We're not really ordinary civil society, because we have this line to divine or something. The fact of the matter is religious actors are civil society actors, first and foremost. And when they are engaged as part of the civil society infrastructure, they are also accountable to that civil society. And when they're engaged to safeguard together the human rights mandate, then they are safeguarding that same civil society that we're so concerned about in this time and moment. There is no way that authoritarian regimes can be countered by the power of only one element of civil society. Authoritarian regimes demand multi-religious civil society collaboration and engagement. Otherwise, we are talking about a hampered or handicapped civil society. If we wish to push back against authoritarianism and thereby uphold the human rights of all, we have to work multi-religiously. It's as simple as that, and yet as complicated as that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was very insightful, and I would like to comment on it, but I would like now ask Mulki to come up and do that, please.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I really thank the forum for inviting me, and I wish you success and congratulate you on your 10th year, and may you have many more birthdays and much more success. And I'm really happy that I get to see Professor Azza Karam. I'm very familiar with her work, and she and I also come from the same part of the world. I'm originally Somali, but I grew up in Egypt, and my family are there, and I'm very familiar with Egypt. I consider it home. I also do research there. And one of her old books that I like, that most of the colleagues I work with in my area also still cite, is the one on Islamicism and the state in Egypt and feminism, and a lot of people still quote that. And thank you for having me here. So I'm going to share some thoughts with you from my perspective as an academic. So some concepts, some ideas. I agree totally with what Professor Azza Karam said. I think she made the points very lucidly, but I guess my contribution would be like these issues of religion, or also the politics of religion, international relations, religious literacy. How have academics and researchers have looked at it, and some key points that perhaps we could think. Hopefully, it will generate some discussion. I hope it won't seem so conceptual, and I hope it won't leave you with the idea like, oh, here comes another researcher just telling us conceptual ideas.
Please use the
mic.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It's
on. Sorry.
It's on,
Sorry.
So you just put it closer to your
Okay.
mouth, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are 4 points, because I tend always to speak too much, so please, there are 4 points that I want to say, and I tend to speak too much, so you better manage the time for me so that you have time to comment and ask questions. And I come at this just, I think it's
very close.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now? Thank you. I'll stay close. Okay. What I'm going to share with you, let me just tell you a little bit where I'm coming from. I'm an associate professor of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm originally trained as an anthropologist. I work on, broadly speaking, textual Islam and lived Islam. I believe bringing together the textual theology and the practical theology on the ground. And so that's where I'm coming from. And also I've been involved in co-teaching courses that are comparative, that look specifically on the role of women in religious institutions, in religious texts, historically as well as in modern times. And I work with colleagues from who are working on Jewish and Christian traditions. So my comments are coming from that perspective. So the 4 points that I want to share with you, and perhaps we can be framework for discussion, the idea of the politics of religion in international relations. We all agree that it's important that we engage with religious actors, that religion is important for good and bad. It can be a force for conflict. We see that all over. And it's certainly a force for peace and peace building. And there's a lot of wonderful work that we know of being done on how religious actors are involved in the religious building. Yeah, I tend to talk with my hands.
But hold it a bit
Okay.
close.
Yes, right.
Like eating it.
But some of the work that has been done in research on this issue while engaging with religious actors is important, particularly in the international relations arena, is there's been kind of like a caution, a pitfall that researchers have pointed to is, are we kind of like reproducing a binary? There's a good religion and there's a bad religion. And are we also instrumentalizing religion? Does it reproduce power dynamics? Does it also sort of take the secular in a way as unmarked, as unproblematic, as unpacked? And I had the opportunity to read Professor Az Karam's speech, and you note this issue, you note this pitfall, but it's still there. It's still there, and this is something we want. I think it's important to talk about and not to take it as a given. What does that mean for us, those of us who are involved in this kind of forum, when there's a certain politics. So, for example, one of the scholars who worked on that is Elizabeth Shackman-Hurd. And she takes some examples of cases in the world where we talk about how religion is a factor in of violence, like the Rohingya, for example, and others. And she notes how there are very many other factors. And even when the best of intentions, when we engage with this idea of religion has a role to play in politics, we end up, in some ways, reproducing this idea of power dynamics, and there's the official religion, and then there's people who are experts on this religion and that religion, and in a way, we take religion as a stable category. We lose sight that it changes, that evolves, and it's not stable. So this is one point that I wanted to highlight and put it out there to be a little bit controversial, right? How do we address that? And to hear from you, is that an issue in your work or not? So that's the first point that I wanted to highlight. The second one is a concept that already several of you mentioned now, and I'm sure some of my colleagues will be talking about, and that's religious literacy. And it's a very important concept, has been written about by academics, debated, disagreed. What does it mean exactly? Some feel like, is it a buzzword now? And now it's something that also is used by policymakers, by activists, by people who care. And I think, again, I want to highlight a number of things that perhaps we think about when we say religious literacy, which I think are good, but also we want to, again, have a debate about what do we mean exactly by religious literacy? What are the dimensions that are relevant? And is there some problem with some of it? So it means several things. So perhaps in a very simplistic way, it means, one way of understanding it is, let's not over-determine religion and let's not under-determine religion. Let's not assume that everything, whether it's good or bad, is because of X religion or Y religion. And at the same time, let's not be ignorant of the role that religion plays, whether in a conflict or in a certain social process. But in order to get there, and that's something we can all agree on, but in order to get there, that requires certain knowledge about XY religion. And so what does that mean? It means, some of the things it means is that religion is not free-floating thing, whatever religion you're talking about, but it always intersects with certain social, cultural, historical, political processes. So how do we tackle that? That's one thing. the other thing that I think religious literacy also means that's important as a concept is that this issue of not approaching religion as a problem, right? But some aspects and how it's used can be a problem. Let's just look at what's happening in Afghanistan and other places. But the point is, how can we address anxiety about religion? How can we engage with religion as part of a mainstream thing, as part of our life, you know, and see the good and the bad, see how it evolves, how it changes. That's the other thing. And then I think another aspect of religious literacy, which is very important, and this is not just from me, this is something that has been written about in research, is what knowledge is produced about religion, and how is that knowledge used among policymakers? What kind of knowledge becomes authoritative? And that's the narrative we know about X religion or Y religion. I think that's also important. And then another dimension of religious literature is that I think I would like to add it to this concept of religious literacy. I haven't seen it written about yet, is to really shed light on new religious actors, right? Not the usual ones, right? There are new religious actors. And it's, you know, and we can give examples about that, but like not the traditionally trained imam, the traditionally trained whatever priest or something, and my examples will come more from Islam since that's the one I'm familiar with and work on. So like for example, women, and women are certainly not homogeneous, and certainly they've had a history in the religious domain, but there are new things happening. And I think part of having religious literacy means let's shed light on these new religious actors. What are they doing? Another aspect I think that is important in religious literacy is how religious knowledge is being acquired by members of the religious community. Now we have this huge revolution in technology. So people can learn a lot of things about their religion from the internet, from the YouTube. They go to classes in the mosque or the synagogue or whatever, you know, so much is being done. And it has pros and cons. On the one hand, you can say there's a democratization of the religious domain. There's diversification of religious knowledge, but it has its complexities as all. So I'm thinking perhaps we can use this concept also to shed light on different kinds of religious institutions. So when we say let's have religious institutions at the table, let's have religious actors at the table. The question that I want to throw out there, which ones? Are we aware of the new ones? And what are they doing? And where do we reach out for them, right? And also this idea of that there's a decentralization of religious authority and knowledge. What does that do for you, the kind of work that you want to do? And then the third thing that I want to highlight is the comparative approach. And this is coming from us, like people who are researchers and teachers. Is there a benefit in comparing religious traditions? And I'm involved in that through my co-teaching with my colleagues. And I think there is. And I think perhaps the comparative approach might be useful for people like you who are interested in multi-religious engagement. But then, and this is something that has been done for a long time, but comparison not in the sense of, okay, of course it involves at some basic level, what are the similarities, what are the differences? But there's very interesting work being done in academia, which I think could be relevant to advocacy, to multi-religious advocacy in doing a different kind of comparison. A comparison like if I'm doing it, let's say from an Islamic perspective, and I'm doing a comparative work that involves Christian tradition, for example, it's the kind of comparison so I get out of my tradition, I learn very deeply the other tradition, and it's the kind of comparison that allows me to come back to my tradition with new insights, with new questions that broadens my horizon. So it's not motivated by who influenced who is the true one, who is more developed, but really pushes the one to come back to one's own tradition and ask new questions and come up with new insights. And One scholar that I really like that does this kind of work, her name is Jerusha Tanner Rhodes. Now she goes by Rhodes, and she teaches in New York in a seminary, and she does this excellent comparative work focusing on religious pluralism as well as comparative feminist theology. And we can talk more about how is that relevant and the kind of things that she does, but I want to highlight that as well. What can we learn from the comparative approach? So for example, in her first book, she talks about this issue of religious pluralism, which is very relevant for us from a Muslim perspective. She says that hers is Muslima theology. And I think the interesting thing about her also is that she does not shy away from her faith-based position. She is a Muslima, i.e. a Muslim woman, but a scholar who's doing a scientific, rigorous inquiry. And she says this is Muslima theology, and she thinks this comparative feminist theology is really, really important. And she looks at this issue of religious pluralism and how, in fact, she makes, I think, a very persuasive argument how against this idea that based on a very interesting analysis of the Quran, but also this comparative approach about how that against this idea of that Muslims are saved and others are not. She goes back to these categories of the Muslim and the mushrik, you know, the person who associates with God other partners, and the munafiq, the hypocrite. These are Quranic categories, right? And she makes this very interesting perspective argument. So I want to again highlight that, and there's very interesting work being done on that level. So does the comparative approach have something to offer us, and can we learn from it in this kind of work? And then the last one that I want to highlight is the issue of spirituality, ethics, and religion. And there's very interesting work that has been done by academics that show that people are interested, postmodern people, not all, but there's definitely real interest in spirituality now. And actually a lot of people want to pursue spirituality, some, right, and many, outside religion. So they have an issue with what they call organized religions, institutional religions, religions that reproduce and sustain and justify hierarchy, whether between men and women, or discriminate against certain groups on whatever basis, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with that research. And there's truth to that, and I think the findings are valid. But I want to shed the light on other processes going on, and some people are writing about it, is how also there's interest in reclaiming spirituality as a key ethos to many of the old religions that we know of, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And now I can share with you a little bit about Islam, which is what I know about, not all of Islam, right? So there's interest in the issue of what is the ethical in the Islamic textual tradition, you know, because now, and a lot of different research organizations and activists are talking about that, and there's this debate about that the legal has taken over, you know, and has diminished and has overshadowed what is the ethical, which is the ethos of the textual tradition itself, and the faith, that it's first and foremost based on ethical principles, based on an ethical message. And there's very interesting work taking place, and some of it actually being spearheaded by Muslim women scholars who are interested in this question of ethics from an Islamic perspective, working on the Quran, working on Sufism, and how Sufism can be a corrective to a patriarchal understanding of Islamic law. And I want to clarify myself, because sometimes when we talk about this point, people understand it, or it might be understood as saying, well, is it the kind of argument or work that the implication of it is that let's forget about Islamic law? Does this mean, let's have a so-called secular governance where we're not really governed by Islamic law? And the kind of people I have in mind that I'm telling you about, one example is Saadiya Sheikh. She's a South African scholar of Islamic studies working on Sufism. And Absolutely not. Another person I have in mind is Asma Lambrabit, a Moroccan scholar. She's a physician, but she's a scholar of Islamic studies who writes a lot in Arabic and in French. These scholars that I have in mind, and there are others, in fact, they very much emphasize that they are working from within the tradition. They are, and distance themselves from a secular approach, not from an antagonistic perspective, but because they are interested in a faith-based perspective. So it's not about completely eliminating Islamic law, but it's about reclaiming the ethical message that they see in Islam through a very rigorous work on Sufism, on the Quran, Quranic ethics. And I want to highlight there are other people who are very much interested in this, although they're not interested in the gender question. One organization that I want to highlight is, for example, KAIL, if you're familiar with it. You know, it's the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. They are based in Qatar as well as in the Brussels. And in my perspective, I mean, I have a high regard for the research they do because of their interest in the ethics. I think I disagree with them on a scholarly basis in terms of I think there's not focus on gender, and I think gender is very important, but I want to also bring them as an example of how they are also interested in this studying and reclaiming the ethical message and the ethical ethos of Islam. And one way of doing that is some women scholars focus on the Quran, but others what they do is that, at least within Islam, one way of doing that is a holistic approach, looking at what does the Quran and the Islamic legal tradition and other genres in Islamic religious sciences, how can they speak to one another? So it's a kind of work that is working against the fragmentation of religious sciences that had happened within Islamic tradition. Hence, my point is spirituality and interest in ethic and what is ethical from a religious point of view actually is making a comeback, is a very important question, not only for those who are disillusioned with organized religion, but from within world religions as well. For example, Islam and others, although the world religion thing is a bit problematic. So these are the key points, some of the points that, I'm done. So these are the points that I just wanted to throw out there, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Professor Azza. Yeah.
Thank you. This was just, what a package. What can I say? So, okay, let's listen to you now. So, what comes to mind? What do you want to comment on? What do you want to ask? Who wants to start? I can help you a bit on the way if you like. I was listening to Asakaram. At some point you were talking about how the fundamentalism is looking for the conformity and the human rights are looking for diversity. I think this is something like very simply said, but it's just what it's about. And then Mulki Al-Sharmani was speaking about all these. I like the comparative approach very much that you were talking about here. How you go somewhere out of your comfort zone. That's what and then you come back with new insight and you just learn about yourself and the world you are living in and the value base that you are like exposing in your daily whatever you do. Yeah. So yes, please. I will give you this now. You talk into this, and I can also help.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the Religion for Peace. I think it's an amazing initiative, and also it has clearly an old history. But what I wanted to ask you is that how do you deal with the challenge, the possible challenge that this is something that is happening on a global level, and doesn't really engage with the local. So I'm interested to learn more about perhaps the conflict between the local and global, because sometimes some of the ideas we might have about initiatives like that, and I'm being provocative, is that, okay, this is leaders from all religion, faiths getting together, talking about things, but what impact and how are they actually, how is this actually happening in local context?
Okay, may I turn around? Because it's
Yeah, please.
Okay, so a couple of points. The Religions for Peace is interreligious councils at the country level. They work on in education, they work on health, they work on working together to provide very practical services to their communities. So it's not, they don't just meet and talk, they actually come together and serve. They will put together their resources and serve. During this COVID disaster, many of these interreligious councils are providing actual, they're giving resources, they do lists for which households are now seriously impacted and affected by the COVID during the lockdown, but also now how many households are rendered minus their incomes because of the COVID dynamics. They list them, they inform the local government so that these households, usually shanty towns, very poor areas, are actually on the radar for some of the national councils, and they can be supported by them. They also work together to pool the resources to provide actual income to families that have lost income. They've been working together to collect food packages, deliver medicines. They are not talk shops. They are actually servants, and they come together to serve together on very concrete projects. Nevertheless, there is, of course, a dissonance between the global and the regional and the national. That's just a normal part of any international structure. Will have different ways of what happens is the national doesn't necessarily go to the global and vice versa. We were talking about that in the context of the United Nations. So the United Nations is a global body with global bodies with many national offices. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything from New York or Geneva or Rome is actually going down to the national level, and vice versa. What is happening at the national level is not necessarily being known to or even appreciated by what's happening in the headquarters of Rome, Geneva, or New York. So there's always that dissonance. But I think one of the points, if I may, that you raised about literacy, because it's such a topical point, and I know that this will be spoken of much more in a few minutes, there is a problem about understanding what religious literacy is. It shouldn't be about religious literacy. At least those of us who are working in the broader intergovernmental spaces have been arguing for a long time that it's not about religious literacy. You don't do religious literacy as in, here's what Islam is, here's what Christianity, Catholicism, and blah. That's not the point. That's happening already, has been happening forever. It's about understanding how it is that religions coexist and why the art of that coexistence is very valuable to be learned about, to be understood, and to be integrated into public policy. That's a very different kind of literacy than what is Islam, what is Christianity, what is Judaism. That's not the literacy that is intended. When we first started talking about this term about 20 years ago, it was referring to the understanding of how different religions coexist in reality. So it's a very different form of literacy. It's about the ways religions coexist and serve, not about what the religions themselves have to say, each and every one of them. So I just wanted to point that we often get the two confused. We think one is the other. No. So your point about then what are we learning about Islam? Or what are we learning about who's teaching what aspects? Of course, becomes very relevant if we're talking about learning about the religion. But here we're talking about a literacy about how different religious communities coexist and serve. And it's a different dynamic to some extent.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Kaisa-Mari, you want to say something. You're welcome.
Thank you. I turn around like this as well. Thank you so much for both of you for something that we really, really need to digest afterwards. But I just wanted to bring what we just heard into a specific Finnish context at the very time that when we're reflecting the religious freedom or the reading and understanding of religious freedom in Finland right now. In 2 years' time, the law of religious freedom in Finland is going to have its centennial anniversary. And sometimes I feel that we're actually coming back to the very beginning. Because originally the law for religious freedom in here, like in many other countries, was about the right to not to believe or not to belong into any religious community or institution. And meanwhile, there has been a kind of more positive reading, and actually the present version of the law for religious freedom is written in the spirit of positive religious freedom, right to believe, right to belong. But the reading of the law at this time is actually the negative. And this is what I wanted to hear from both of you. What would be your understanding of how the change actually happened in the international community, in the UN organizations that traditionally thought that we have nothing to do with the religion, we don't deal with it, we don't need to deal with it. And there has been quite a dramatic change in that understanding now within the last maybe 15 years. So how would we bring this kind of understanding into the Finnish society as well, and actually into we have many Nordic colleagues around here, and I think that's the issue in all the Nordic countries, and also in the Northern Europe as well. But particularly here in the Finnish reading, I think it's enormously important to challenge the negative reading and to bring up the positive reading. And I think exactly the way you presented the religious literacy is one of the key issues. But I would love to hear more from you. What would be the ways to challenge and to bring the religions into public space in a way that we are seen in the public space, not just by ourselves, but for the rest of the community and society as well?
Anna Mikki, thank you for this.
Yeah.
Who is answering? Okay.
Okay, just a couple of things. Something to Professor Azza and to you, the very important point that you raised. I think perhaps part of the work would involve, and to address your point, I'm wondering is that to tackle dogma, broadly speaking, and not to and to start not disassociating dogma from religion. Of course there's religious dogma, of course there's that, but there are different kinds of dogma. Usually there's this idea that religions only have kind of, what would you say, the edge or the privilege or the thing or the monopoly over dogma, but we do not question, and I'm being provocative, we do not question secularist dogma. You know, that is understood, and that there is secularist dogma, and that is understood as something. It's unmarked. It's not questioned. It's the thing that is normal. We don't talk about it. So I think one way to start, and perhaps it's not, it's one step before we get to the positive religion and the freedom to believe, is perhaps to have a debate about dogmatic thinking and to broaden how we understand dogmatic thinking, and that there's a range of dogmatic thinking and it's problematic, and there's the religious one and there's the secular one. And so I think perhaps maybe it's not directly the answer to what you're saying, but I think it's an important step of what you're saying. Now, Professor Hazza, to go back to your point about religious literacy is point well taken. Okay, it's about how these religions can coexist and live and work together. But I am wondering, okay, for different religious actors to come together and work together, they can say, well, you know, all of us having dignity and peace and development, well, all the things you said, sustainable development, peace and security, human rights, that's, of course, things that all religious traditions share, and let's at least agree on that, and that will be our common ground, and let's see how we can work together. Okay, I can see that. However, do you think, based on what we know about different local contexts, where difference now is very polarizing, and there's this idea on the local level, individually, that certain people, because of certain religious ideas, they believe that we are the ones who are saved and others are not. There's a hierarchy. So I'm wondering, is that enough for religious actors to come together and work for these grounds, or we also need to do the important work, theological work, going back to the text and finding out which interpretations became authoritative and why, and where did they come from, and is that true to the religion?
Yes, you want to comment?
Very quickly.
Briefly, please.
I understand that our this esteemed
Yes.
guest is here, so just a quick couple of points. First, it's already, this multi-religious collaboration is happening already and has been happening for centuries. COVID is one of the recent examples of how the religious communities forego the dogma because they're busy serving the very basic needs. So this isn't something that we need to, we can study it based on what's already happening. But interreligious dialogue, where religions come together to speak to one another about their theology, has been the beginning of what we know today to be interreligious collaboration, multi-religious collaboration. So yes, it's important, but they don't necessarily follow. So you still have interreligious dialogue going on all over the world, and you have multi-religious collaboration going on all over the world. To your brilliant question, freedom of religion and belief is understood, is unfortunately only a, I don't know how you say this, we've cut off a broader name. If you look at Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. The understanding being that freedom of thought is connected to the freedom of conscience, is connected to the freedom of belief. It's not religious freedom. It is that entire continuum of freedom to exist and to be in whichever way, shape, or form. We have, unfortunately, especially in the Western Hemisphere, cut out a small part of that, freedom of religion or belief, and made that a very critical focus. Per definition, it is obviously a very important focus, but that isn't what we're talking about. So it's not good enough to give authoritarian regimes a clap because they're doing a really good job on coming up with a legislation on religious minorities and their rights, but they're very authoritarian regimes, actually. And if we were to hold them accountable to the entirety of freedoms of thought, conscience, and belief, then we would be holding them accountable to their ability to govern in the first place. What we are living and suffering from now is how some aspects of freedom of religion and belief have become so politicized. They've become part of foreign policy of certain governments, not of all, of certain governments, and therefore got caught up in the power politics between governments and invariably in the power politics between religious institutions. So if we are to be focused on freedom of thought, conscience, and belief as an inherent continued package, then we would realize that movements for democracy, democratization, human rights are part of freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. They are not a standalone and they're not separate. They are advocating for and holding accountable that entirety of freedoms. So therefore, again, the point about struggling for human rights is struggling for this earth and the sanity of our people is about freedom of thought, conscience, and belief.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. Now, we will give the word to our Minister of Science and Culture, Mr. Antti Kurvinen. Warmly welcome to our anniversary. Please, the floor is yours. And after this, this speech that he will hold on religious literacy, please do ask some questions then. These all are tied together. Here's the microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen, dearest social peace builders, I'm sorry that I'm a little bit late. We had a voting in the parliament, so if you want to stay as a minister, you have to be voting, because if we lose, there will be no government and no more minister. So I had a quite good reason. But thank you very much for this kind invitation to. Okay, I push it maybe. I go here. Thank you for this kind invitation to this very important anniversary seminar, and it's a great pleasure to convey greetings from the government to this seminar and celebrate the USKOT-forum 10 years. My title in the government is Minister of Science and Culture, but also my responsibilities include so-called Minister for the Church position, which means that I'm responsible for all the issues relating to religious communities, not only only the traditional two Finnish churches, but all the issues and all the legislation considering religious communities. And today I have a possibility to talk about the growth of pluralism in Finnish society and the importance of religious literacy today and especially in the future when this pluralism will increase if we look at the development what we have. Firstly, I am going to tell a little bit about my own condition in relation to this work as a so-called church minister. Dear guests, my background is as a lawyer, and I've studied law, so I see it was really interesting to listen your conversation about the freedom of religion and freedom of thought that you had here when I become. So I see it as a primarily human right and a primarily basic right, which is protected both in our national constitution and also in all the human rights pacts we are part of, we as a Finns, and the freedom of religion and freedom of conscience includes the right to process and practice religion and right to express personal convictions and the right to belong or refrain from belonging to a religious community. And when I started in this position, in fact, I have been 5 months in this position today. So I started in the end of May. I'm quite new yet to come. And considering these religious affairs, I have said many times that maybe in the Finnish society we too much we want to bold and we want to highlight the so-called negative freedom of religion. But I hope we also could talk about the positive side of the freedom of religion and freedom of conscience, because to many persons belonging to some religious community is a big strength in their lives and a big light in their lives, especially in the problematic times, but also in the everyday life. So I want to talk about the positive side of the religious freedom also. Finnish constitution states that public authorities have a duty to safeguard fundamental and human rights, and this duty includes both preventing and deterring violations of religious freedom and investigating and resolving such violations if they happen. And this duty to protect human rights and basic rights is very broad. Finnish society, as I said when I started my speech, has undergone a profound change in recent decades. We used to have quite one culture and one way of living in Finnish society quite long. And one example of that is that about 100 years ago, 98% of Finland's population officially belongs to the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Since then, this has changed a lot, and number of religiously unaffiliated individuals and members of other registered religious communities has grown. Many new religious communities have been established by immigrant origin persons, and I think it's clear that this pluralism will increase even more in the future. Unfortunately, this development has also seen a rise of confrontation and also some hostile caricatures. People also experience prejudice and discrimination on the basis of their religion. So, how we, the government, should work with this pluralism and what we should do, and how we can keep our society stable and good for everyone when there is also some confrontations. So then we come to my main point, religious literacy. I think that is the main point to cope with this changing situation. It is important to appreciate that religion and its meaning to people is not something that can be separated from the rest of the person's life. Religion and faith are not merely meaningful to religious people, but they are also socially significant factors. Religion or an absence of religion affects people's lives and choices, much same way than, for example, education, economical situation, or gender. Religious literacy can even begin development in childhood when we are raised in homes that express a frank interest in other religions. This ability is further developed in early childhood education and at schools, where students are given a broad general education in questions of religion and personal outlook. I think religious literacy is part of versatile understanding of one's own religion. It is also important for students to become familiar with the world of various religions in a diverse way. Religious literacy is part of everyone's civic skills. I think religious literacy is as important as media literacy, which is discussed a lot today. Dear friends, it is also important for the importance of religions to be appreciated in policy making and for dialogue to take place with religious communities. This approach has also proved its worth during the pandemic, with religious communities have played a big part in discharging social responsibility, both in terms of respecting restrictions and taking care of the weakest among us. And I think this last part has always been a big task for every religious community during the history. Both my predecessor and I have greatly appreciated the roundtable discussions what we have had with religious communities, including the core forum, at which we have reviewed the unfolding situation and worked together to find solutions to the epidemic and other challenges. And I want to thank from my heart from this important job we have done together during the pandemic times. I and my predecessors and also the civil servants in the Ministry of Education and Culture really appreciate the work you have done. And that cooperation what we have done between religious communities and Finnish government. I also warmly welcome the way in which religious communities have encouraged their members to take vaccines. It is important to discharge our social responsibilities and to get the vaccination percent as high as possible in Finland. You also, as religious leaders, have a big role to play in this work. Dear friends, there are some thoughts about the religious literacy and also some thoughts from me as a quite new Minister for Religious Affairs, and I am happy to hear your ideas on this theme and to respond to your questions if you have some. Thank you for this possibility.
Thank you so much, Minister Kurvinen. Now, for my part, really what hit me is the idea of when you are looking into other religions and then you go back to your own, then you start understanding it even more. And this is also something that was addressed earlier here, so it's really important. But now, who wants to ask a question here? Please. Let's have the microphone.
It's more like just a comment,
Lift
something
it.
to share. First of all, I want to congratulate the Minister on your new position and wish you best of luck. And I just want to share that as part of an Academy of Finland project that I was involved in, we studied how several Muslim religious communities were taking part in family well-being. And one of the key findings we found was that this model that we have in Finland, which is a Nordic model where there's a legal space for religious communities to be integral part of the civil society and to partake in the work of creating a vibrant society, really created the space for these Muslim religious communities that my colleagues and I studied. I think so that model, at least as based on our research, works. There are some problems in terms of financial support that they get and the resources that they need, and people can also, if they're interested, check our research. But I just wanted to say that at least that model, based on our research, works. So, thank you.
Next, who wants to pop the next question here or comment? Yes, Pia, please.
Thank you very much in the behalf of the core forum that you could come and shed the lights here. And maybe one issue I think we discussed sometime. This is maybe a little bit, as you say, church minister. So is there some time going to change the name from religions minister? Because if we are like talking, we are in as a multi-religious country nowadays, so it would be nice to have inclusivity also to other religions from that point of view. So thank you very much for your insights.
Yeah, that is not official name. It's a little bit like saying the official name is Minister of Culture and Science. And traditionally in Finnish government, I give you now a small lecture about our political system, not very long, but traditionally we used to have two ministers in Ministry of Education and Culture. And the other one has been Minister of Education and the other one has been Minister of Culture. Minister of Education have had all the levels of education from the primary school to universities and science academy and things like that. And the other one has held youth, sports, culture, religious affairs, which includes both Orthodox Church and Lutheran Church matters, which are a little bit more authority matters, if I could say, because there are, as you know, there are registering tasks and things like that, which have these two. They have taxation possibility and things like that, and also other religious communities. But there is no such a name as a church minister. But I think it's not very good English or Finnish or any language to say that I'm a minister for religious communities and religious affairs and blah 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 blah. So it's maybe shorter to say that I'm a. But I could also say that I'm a minister of religion, if that is better. But there is no name in the Finnish government that I'm a minister of church. But it's like maybe like a common language thing. But the formal when there are my duties listed, there is religious affairs, and these two churches and other religious communities. So I think it's quite good included.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we had one question there. Odota. Hey, Jaro. Just a moment.
Sorry to slip in, but somehow I feel
Jaronna
guilty for
Kornikille
the
toi.
discussion here as
Hänellä
well. And
oli
I'm sorry, Pia, you were the first one to ask the
ensin.
question. I actually wanted to take it up as well. I think we in the Lutheran Church are also to blame that this kind of pet name for the minister continues to live on. And let's put it this way: this be my little contribution for the celebration of USKOT, that we try to change our language within the Lutheran Church and stop speaking about church minister, kirkkoministeri, but move into, which is reflecting the whole diverse reality within the Finnish society, to start speaking about religious minister or uskontoministeri, which is rather fluent Finnish as well and much more correct.
Okei, nyt Jaronille.
Toivottavasti oli Helsingin Sanomien toimittaja paikalla.
Mä en ole siis Helsingin Sanomien toimittaja, jos joku luulee. Yeah, hi, I'm Jeroen Bornik, representing the Jewish community of Finland and also active member of the core forum for many years. And you know, this whole debate is uninteresting for us because from our perspective, you can't separate religion or culture. It's really the same thing. So, you know, anything works from our perspective. We heard earlier here, very interesting, from Professor Karam, I believe, about the faith-based actors and non-denominational, non-faith-based actors, and how to become more. And we talked about acting on a global level, acting on a national level, and acting on a grassroots level. Because the problem, the good thing is that when you act on a global level, you can say, I spoke to the United States, or national level, you can say, I spoke to the Church of Finland. It's easy, you know, it's a big bunch of group of people, really maybe one person or two people. But it immediately becomes big. Grassroots, it's small. Even if you invite 50 people for coffee in your house, it's still not, you can't say, well, I spoke with those. Well, I have to spoke with this person, that person. It becomes less tangible somehow. So that's why it may be easier to start this dialogue on a national or global level and then maybe move on forward to the grassroots level. CORE is working on all those levels. But my question to you, Minister, is, as you said, Finland is a changing society. And as we've seen, most governments, Western democracies, have actually failed in this integration process. And I do feel that Finland is also following the exact same path taken by many other Western democracies in the past 20 years to 30 years. So I would like to start a dialogue and ask all of us here, and Minister as well, how can we change this? Because when governments worked fact-based, right? You have facts on the ground and you say we spoke with those people and those people, we spoke with all the people. But faith-based actors, and this is a growing part of the future constituency of Finland, actually they work faith-based. So they're more okay with not having facts on the ground, so to speak, and it becomes, and the discussion in the society and actually in social media is very much emotion-based. And how to distinguish faith and emotion, it's difficult. But I think therein lies the challenge, that we can't work merely by distinguishing culture. We're only talking about culture here. We're only talking about faith. We're actually talking about the development of a society that is becoming much more different than it used to be. And I think we are none of us here are actually equipped to deal with this question. But I would like to see a more steady dialogue, not only in Finland, our Danish colleagues can also take some back to your country and give us learning what you're doing well. But we need to start this dialogue, and we need to start it today, because I think if we continue merely by having certain individuals, certain faith-based actors working on this sometimes actually on a merely voluntary basis, then it won't work out to the level that it should be working out. Thank you.
Haluaako ministeri kommentoida?
Joo.
Very broad and very complex question. I only give few remarks to that, or very complex comment. Good speech, but some comments. I think one problem in Finland is that we don't nowadays, when we have, to be honest, really secular society, and we as a Finns, like in other Nordic countries, we are really pragmatic, and we don't maybe understand how much our culture is based on Christianity and Lutheran Church and things like that. But in most of citizens' lives, most of Finns don't go to church every week, even though they are part of the Lutheran Church, and there are some big holidays, Christmas and so on. So many Finns don't understand the power of faith and don't realize both the positive and negative side, mainly positive. I want to promote the positive side. For example, in the pandemic, we have seen how how important it has been that religious communities have helped people, their members, and have been given right information and things like that. That is one thing I think we should see and realize how important faith is to most of the people in the globe. That is how it is, and we don't always today understand that, and that's one reason why I was talking about religious literacy. But in integration or in the stable society, stable pluralism, it's such a hard word to say. It's really colorful or colorful society. I think it's important that we have places in our ordinary lives and in our everyday lives when we meet people from different backgrounds. And I just want to highlight one project that we have in the Ministry of Education and Culture. Now we are promoting in the children and youth hobbies, we are promoting so-called Finnish model. So we want to bring children and youth hobbies to part of the school day. And I've been visiting few of these lessons, a few of these Finnish model hobbies in some part of the Helsinki, and I realized that this is really a big project when we are talking about integration. It hasn't been started as a part of integrating different communities and people from the different religious backgrounds. But when I've been studying the model, I understand that this is a really good everyday common life way to get people from the different backgrounds to meet each other and maybe get friends and things like that. And I believe in when people understand that even though we have different beliefs and different cultures, we still are same human beings, and we can live together and we can respect each other and respect each other's culture and background. And that is the way to build. We don't have, if we have bubbles and if we have polarization, if we have fences and we don't live in the same areas and we have prejudices, then we will get problems. But this is just such a broad question. I cannot answer fully to it, but we have to understand the significance of religion. We have to understand faith-based world. We have to have religious literacy, and we have to meet each other and have some. They can be little things. They can be maybe some local work in some suburbs or things like that. There can be associations to work to get a better suburb, things like that. I think those are the ways to build, to keep Finland stable and to avoid the mistakes that may have been done for example, in some European countries.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, please.
Thank you, Minister, for your presentation. I'm Samuel J. Kumar. I'm from India. So I will ask some question much broader than the local context. The largest situation of the freedom of religion or belief context in global is around 2/3 of the global population lives with a lot of restriction on the freedom of religion question. Where I work in South Asia, many of the countries, it's a very, very important challenge and important question. Now, the question to you is, I believe for Finland, human rights is an important, for your government, important concern. But then what is more important is, can you able to have a position on a special ambassador on freedom of religion or belief within your government position, where to address the global context where the freedom of religion or belief is a real challenge in different parts of the world. For example, many Scandinavian countries have, last 2-3 years, have developed this position because they realized it's very important to address this concern. For example, Denmark has a special ambassador, but I'm not sure how in Finland you don't have that position. So what I'm trying to say is, being Finnish government as well as this, we need to do much larger to address this issue in globally. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the question about to having such ambassador is more related, or it's not related. It's their job. It's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issue. So I cannot promise or cannot say we are not going to have that kind of ambassador. But there haven't been talks about this kind of special ambassador. But good idea. I will keep it on the agenda when I meet Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Finland starting as a new member in the UN Human Rights Council. So our role in protecting and promoting human rights all over the globe is getting bigger, and in every level of Finnish foreign policy, we are talking about human rights. For example, when we have discussions in the science diplomacy, or there will be big sport events. We had Olympics in Tokyo, and we will have Winter Olympics in Beijing, and every time when we are working in the global field, Finland is talking about human rights. And also we keep the freedom of religion on the agenda, and we want to promote it in good ways. In Finland, we have an old saying that we like to see us in the global field more as a doctors, more as a doctors, less judges. So we try to tell that our experiences during the history is that when we protect these things and promote these things, we have gotten a good society. And I think this is one good way to promote freedom of religion, for example, in South Asia, because our experiences, we had the act of freedom of religion in 1920, so it's about 100 years old when we got independent. We become independent state, so it has been really integral part of our model of our society, religious freedom, long time. And I think it has provided good development. And I think we can say in the global field that when you respect also minority religions, and when you try to build dialogue between religions, then you will have a stable and happy society. And I think we can tell from our experiences, not so much, not judge so much, not so much say that you should do this and this. We can more tell that we have done this. This has provided this good development. So that is maybe what we could do in the global field. But I cannot promise, but I cannot say that we won't ever have such ambassador, but I cannot promise anything.
Thank you so much, Minister Kurvinen, for your So we are releasing you now if you want to leave, which we understand you have a busy day still. Yes, thank you. So yes, thank you so much. All the good. Thank you, we will. Thank you. Yeah, I thought that we could now have the intermission. Yeah. Coffee, cinnamon buns, go and grab it. We are continuing with Pekka Lindqvist after intermission. Yes. 20 minutes. Yeah, so you get some oxygen, eat something. taking the floor. And we are not waiting for you. What was? Eikö sieltä saa tulla kahvia? En mä tiedä. Aha, no kato. Dear friends, we are continuing now with Pekka Lindqvist's speech. Very interesting topic. It's about the perspective of the faith-centered interfaith work. Please, Pekka.
Good afternoon. I think I will try to manage without it
Okay.
because there were complaints about the echo in the room. Good. Secondly, I'm sorry about the tight timetable now. Therefore, I had to cut out the three interfaith jokes in the beginning. But I suggest that someday, perhaps the next conference will be about the humor and interfaith jokes, because it's a large field. But now you have to manage without them. I come from the academia. I'm also a Christian, a Lutheran pastor. But perhaps different from many others in this gathering today, I have been speaking with my partners practically only theological questions, faith matters. And that is what I will stress also now. Secondly, I have been involved almost exclusively in the Jewish-Christian dialogue and Jewish-Christian-Muslim trialogue. So this is my perspective, and I'm not trying to step out of this box too much. I'm aware of the fact that this forum, which we celebrate today, aims at the peace in the society through, as the name says, cooperation of the religions. The aim is practical for the welfare of the society. Then why to try to bring in a perspective of religious speech, faith-focused encounter in which partners gather to discuss the substance of their faiths? The reason is simple. It is how it all began. And by saying how it all began, I do not, of course, refer to what happened in Helsinki 2011. But, for example, what happened in Ephesus 160, when Justin Martyr meets a Jewish learned man, Trypho, be it a real or imaginary encounter. The latter says, "Tell me your opinion of these matters, and what idea you entertain respecting God, and what your philosophy is." And the other replies, "Well, let me bring my proofs from the scriptures, and do not hesitate to rely on me." Or I could refer to what happened in Galilee, in Sepphoris, where Rabbi Eliezer meets a representative of the young Jesus movement. Or what happened in Baghdad in 8th century when Caliph al-Mahdi sat down with Catholicos Patriarch Timotheus I, and they started to discuss about the book of Isaiah. This is how it all began. The religions were drawn to each other not only by the historical circumstances that they shared Ephesus or Baghdad, but also because of the shared theological orientation to the written revelation, to Abraham, to the prophets, to the idea that there is one God above us. And if I quote a book of my Jewish partners, that above us is a seeing eye, a listening ear, and that all our deeds are being inscribed in a book, Pirkei Avot 2:1. That was the shared conviction of these coming together. The theological dialogue, discussion on faith matter leads, I believe, to the most profound encounter, and at its best, this encounter between individuals results in forming the bonds of friendship and mutual respect. But let me very, very shortly sketch some historical lines. Sometimes to my students in the university, I have described this development of the religious encounter after World War II as a 3-stage rocket to the moon. The first stage rose up from the cry, "Never again." That was the fuel. And the engineers, they were, for example, those Jews and Christians who gathered in 1947 in Seelisberg to formulate the first interfaith document, 10 Points of Seelisberg. The engine was their vision, the vision that religions must come together to secure that humanity will never again fall into such dark pits it had done. But in what way we should meet, it was not too much pondered in this document. The second phase, the second stage in the moon rocket is always the largest, at least in that miniature model which I had as a little boy. The long, intensive era of searching and finding the way to work side by side and finding a way to stand together facing the challenges of the more and more secular world and fight prejudices can be put somewhere between the late 50s, perhaps early 60s, and until 1990s. When it comes to the theological substance, this long period of 30 to 40 years, it was an intensive search for the common roots and, in general, what combines us. This became the major project of the years to follow. Many publications bore also these words, common roots. The third phase, in my view, absolutely the most interesting and promising, is happening now and has been for the last 20 years or so. It is marked by the re-emergence of the theological and spiritual encounter, a joint search for the deepest roots. And now I try to not to describe anything which is not truthful. I just want to paint a picture in which an aspect which for a long time has been secondary re-emerges in the very center in the eyes of many. Perhaps the stress on the faith matters has sometimes been even considered embarrassing in the interfaith field. Religions which come together mostly in humanitarian issues perhaps appeared in the eyes of the non-religious world, permeated with doctrines of progress optimism as modern and progressive. But to stress that we in effect sit down together because we believe in God's eye above us, on miracles, on supernatural revelation, on angels, on Abraham, on the last judgment, and so on, perhaps sometimes sounded even disturbing in this context. But undeniably, these are the core. And it's good that this forum is core forum. It reminds us of the core, the nucleus. Then there is the question, can we discuss about these difficult matters which I just listed? Many doubts about the sense of the interfaith encounter focusing on faith matters has been heard from the 60s onwards, when the search for the common roots started. One of the most recent and almost unchallengeable might be the critical note put forward by two wise Danish men, Michael Wolff and Anders Morgenthaler. It's this one. Religion, one of the reasons why someone invented talking about the weather. Somewhat more systematically formulated doubts were put forward, for example, by the famous Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, with his influential essay Confrontation. The dynamite in his essay was that he excluded any possibility to faith matters dialogue as being void of any sense. And why? The problem is the incommunicability of faith matters. According to him, it is not possible to share insights that are exclusively part of one's subjective spiritual experience. Try to do it with a partner who belongs to another faith community and uses different language, and you end up in giving a distorted picture. All the more so if the faith communities are, as he said, intrinsically antithetic, as he defined Judaism and Christianity in his essay. But joint efforts should be restricted to the realm of humanitarian issues only. But many, including me, disagree today. It is very true that even when we say some very common word, let's say God, we hear different things. That's clear. When you as a Jew or a Muslim say God, what I as a Christian hear is, first of all, the Father of Jesus Christ, which might sound a little bit odd in your ears. And now I leave aside that fact that hundreds of millions of Christians also bow to the Mother of God. That's difficult. Is there any sense to continue to discuss about the deepest faith matters? Yes, there is. It is not only possible, it's an imperative. One modern answer to Soloveitchik's reservations is that modern dialogue is no more seeking for what combines us and seeking for a common understanding. Rather the opposite. What is common was found and diagnosticized a long time ago, several decades ago, insufficient common understanding. This brings me to the final paragraph. Now I jumped over again 2 jokes. Sorry for that. Final paragraph in order to have time for the panel. What is the good path for our day today? After decades of active and organized interfaith encounter, also voices of frustration have been heard. I have heard. For example, has not every thinkable perspective been discussed already? Where should we go now in our faith matters discussions? Because there is a limited number of questions. I visited many years ago the UK with some colleagues in order to learn about the experiences there. And what was said by several veterans of interfaith work paved a way to a change in my mind. Some of them expressed their frustration over the old-fashioned meeting of religions where 2 or 3 papers are read, lectures, and the participants are in effect only waiting for the next move to the lobby for tea and biscuits. For the first, what happens by the tea and biscuits is often incomparably more important than those papers read. Secondly, we already agree on the fact that we have many things in common. So instead of seeking the common ground, let's celebrate the difference, as a much used slogan says. And as a matter of fact, shouldn't the difference in effect be the most basic driving force for entering into a religious dialogue at all? At least it is much more interesting. So no more papers on the things common, but on the differences. But what paths could we choose if we think of practical life? One path increasingly followed in many parts of the world is the scripture-focused dialogue, in which the sacred scriptures speak, and an individual appears as a disciple bearing his or her scripture to the meeting. The religions do not speak, but believers. This is also in a way the approach known in the academic world as lived religion, already mentioned here today. And this seems also to be a good answer to the incommunicability dilemma too. The scriptures speak and the meeting becomes automatically spiritual. This kind of scriptural reasoning approach has been followed here in Finland too during the last few years in the meetings in which I have been one of the organizers, and many of people in this hall today have been participating. Each party brings a text chosen according to a theme into the meeting. Then he or she listens carefully the sacred text of the two other partners. We always have 3 Abrahamic faiths. And then, by asking, he or she tries to approach a deeper understanding of how this other reads and hears his or her scripture, and how this very piece of sacred scripture guides him or her in her path of life, be it inner and spiritual or choices of everyday life. Themes like good deeds, hatred, suffering, angels, prophets, death, life after death have been studied in our meetings with this method. And today Facebook reminded me that exactly this day a year ago we discussed angels in our scriptures. I strongly recommend that you read, if you can read Finnish, the reports of these meetings. They are all collected on the website theologia.fi. Let me conclude by going back to the beginning. We met already Justin Martyr and Trypho in Ephesus. Their dialogue on faith matters, a sort of scriptural reasoning documented in the 142 chapters by the pen of Justin, ends in a most encouraging way. As a farewell, we find Trypho saying, "I confess that I have been particularly pleased with this conference, for we have found more than we expected." And the other, who is about to travel away, Justin, and the ship is already waiting there, he responds, "For my part, if I had remained, I would have wished to do the same thing every day." Thanks.
Thank you, Pekka. This was really interesting, and there is one thing I must ask you, if this was a joke, before I let the audience ask their questions. You said there's a limited number of questions. I guess that was a joke.
That was, in a way, a joke, but some of the questions are very, very difficult, and they must wait till we have learned a little bit more, and then we enter them.
Okay.
Let's say it this way.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we are having some time for a couple of questions. Who wants to ask Pekka Lindqvist on this really, really interesting subject? That is, before we are entering our tiny panel. Any waving arms here? Nope. Okay. Please.
Thank you, Pekka. I mean, you're a very good speaker, and I agree with the comments you said. I think that people can hear me, but can you tell us more about...
No, they can't.
Yeah, sorry. So I think you were making the point that the focus on the differences is more fruitful, if I got you right. Can you elaborate on that? Like, how would that be, and what would be the approach?
I think I already said what, in my view, was the most important, that is the most basic reason for entering into dialogue. If we see learning the other, learning some new things as our goal, then the difference is the thing that I want to learn about. We have already used, this was a little bit caricature, of course, but we and our predecessors have already used decades for searching what is common, and therefore I ask for a little bit new perspective and stress emphasis.
just because thank you very much for your speech. It was really interesting. I was thinking inclusivity in the theological dialogue, because sometimes you you find out some ideologies are not included into dialogue. They are already taken out of the question, that you don't talk about them. And then these people, they stay behind, you know, in the society, and they are talking about their ideology by themselves because other people don't want to talk with them. And personally, I think this is a problem. We should include all kinds of ideologies from different religions and even secular thoughts, that we can really have the discussion. So this is one of the, what do you think about this?
Important point of view. In fact, here we have only the 3, but there we have, inside the 0, we have some other signs too, which is a good development. Of course, then we need perhaps different methods in approaching a larger group. For example, groups which are not first and foremost reading written revelation. Then we need another approach, but absolutely, if I put it shortly, I agree. Yes, we should try to search for new ways of approaching and bringing together. For us, these 3, it works well because we have our scriptures, we have this little common ground where to stand and where to understand each other in a sufficient way. Then we need some other small places where to put ourselves in order to discuss with those who are totally different.
Quickly, okay, quickly, very quickly.
Point about the difference. Is it also about finding new commonalities? So if we're talking about these 3, we have one God, we have the prophets, we have the angels, we have the afterworld. Is difference also about finding new commonalities?
New commonality between these old friends already, new areas where to meet somehow, if I try to interpret. Yes, sure. I think, okay, there, the choice of topics where to approach each other, it's not limited. Even if I said that the number of topics for discussion might be limited, we can always open new areas where to look for commonality. How to do it, I have not pondered it. It is something that also perhaps develops with time. We are still learning, I think, this old way with some new openings, and one of these new openings might be this coming together to the Holy Scriptures, and then the next step might be something else, a new opening.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, we wouldn't have time. I'm sorry. We must respect your time. We will now do the panel. We will do it, as you say, quick and dirty. So it will be in the following way. All the panelists will come, well, we could stand here, Anas, Timo, and Laura Maria, and Timo, the other Timo, yes, and then me. So I will hand you this one here now, and we have our team for this, that was supposed to be the panel discussion, moving towards peace and human rights in religion. So what we will do, okay, you will just give a few sentences on what you, from your religion's perspective, would want to say about this thing. And I have definitely written something here, so I can start. Yeah, is it okay? Yeah, I'm starting. Yeah. I have my own. Yeah. Okay, so it's about moving towards peace and human rights within Judaism. So the issue on human rights, there has been a lot of writings in the Torah. And from the very beginning of times when Adam and Eve were evicted from the Garden of Eden, they had to constantly fix things, fix the damage that had been done. So this has to do fix relationships that we have to other people and also our relationship to nature. We don't own these things and it's our obligation to care for everything that's growing and living around us. On the Shabbos, it means that we don't drive the car, we don't turn light on and off, we don't use any electrical devices, using money, going shopping, you know, these things. So if we think about this from the perspective of the story of creation, we came last. Everything was there ready for us to take care of. And so this all boils down to one thing. It is about taking care of each other and taking care of nature. Respecting it, maintaining it, and doing everything in a sustainable way. So when it comes to the relationship between people, in the Torah it is also clearly said that the slave and the servant both have equal human rights as the master. This means that the slave has the right to sleep on a pillow and a mattress that are equal to the one that the master is lying on, and to eat the same kind of food. And the servant is to be paid for the work being done. And pre-Torah times, way back, were really, really brutal on slaves. They had no human rights. So what the Torah brought along was the sense of, and sensibility also of these things, and putting them into effect, doing it in the everyday life. So when it is said that we have been created as the image of God, actually it means that we must see another human being in every encounter. Thank you.
Thank you. As I should stand maybe a little bit. So as for Islam, of course, we look in Islam as a continuation of the prophecies since Adam, a continuation of prophets that has sent and came with the same message. So what already existed is also reaffirmed in Islam and built upon. Each prophet, block by block, prophet by prophet, and speaking to each society that these prophets came to. So this build-up of human rights is continuation in our view from the beginning, from Adam's time until Prophet Muhammad's time, until each one of us also reaffirms these rights that are reaffirmed in Islam and in the Quran. In the Quran, of course, we see verses that came at a time when there was misunderstanding, there was ignorance, actually, a time of ignorance in the society that that Quran came in. There was two large empires that looked at the rights of their citizens in different ways. There were people who were denied rights. There were people, women were denied their rights in the Arabic society at the time in many cases, and in those two empires that ruled the world at that time. So there was a change after the Quran came in the Arabic society and in these societies around us as Muslims. The reaffirmation of the rights of women in their home and as wives, and in their education, in their financial rights. They were denied these rights before, and these were reaffirmed in the Quran that they have these. the right to freedom to all, the right to life to all, equality between in duties and in in duties and in rights between men and women religiously also were reaffirmed in the Quran. The right of slaves to freedom, this was reaffirmed in Islam. All people were created equal. All of you are from Adam, and Adam is from the earth. So that's also an affirmation of human rights in Islam. So this is, when we talk about affirming and developing human rights, this is something that has been from the beginning, has been built upon in our view, and has been continued from the time of Prophet Muhammad until this time. And it is the basis of I think, many things in the Declaration of Human Rights that the UN signed on. And it was reaffirmed also in 81 in a separate declaration of Islamic human rights. So all of these are a continuation and a build-up. And I think this is what we have to go on. So thank you for this. Even the rights of the rights of non-humans like animals and so on, and the environment, as was said, these are also in Islam. But let's just stick with these human rights at the moment. Thank you.
Yes. Christianity, human rights and peace, that's a huge topic. And so I choose to speak about what I've been thinking about today, during the day. Thank you all for your speeches and thoughts. Also, when having coffee, that is at least as important as a part of a conference. So my church, the Lutheran Church in Finland, the Lutheran churches worldwide and the Christian churches worldwide have been working for peace and with questions regarding peace and human rights for decades. And that's something to build on from now on, and there has been of course cooperation already, as we know, but I think it's very important what Azakaram said in the beginning, that it must be done multiculturally. And what I see is that my church, our church, has the great resources in Finland. And as Kaisa-Mari Hintikka already promised that she will do something, so I'm working on the local level. So I promise for my part also to take initiative in where I am working and living to involve other faith communities in the work for peace and human rights. And I started with Tuomas during the coffee break, who is also from Turku. So what I'm trying to say is that we can work together for peace and human rights and any other issues that are relevant for people around us and in our communities and outside our communities. And the most important and most important work is the work that is done on the local level. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm representing the Finnish Buddhist Union, and this subject is of course very, very broad, but I have a very kind of a short and simple point, and it's something that the Dalai Lama said in some interview, that my religion is kindness. And this sounds very, very simple, almost too simple, but it's still not. It's still quite hard to be to think about what does it really mean to be truly kind. And I see this kindness as something that is the basis of what we are talking about, human rights and peace. The opposite of kindness would be that I am right, you are wrong. And it's just something about, we're talking about human rights, but as it was said here, things are at least in the Buddhism, we have this concept of interrelatedness and interconnectedness. Everything is connected to everything else, so we cannot really talk about human rights without talking about nature, without talking about every living and even non-living things on the earth. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm Timo Koponen, representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's the Mormons, long name. Our peace concept really comes from the family concept as well, meaning that we believe that these relationships we have are eternal. We were created before we were born, actually. So we think that because we are all family and we are all brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, naturally we have to learn to live with one another. And especially when we have to keep this relationship after this life, it's even more important. When it comes to the other religions, I think there's a very good quote by the founder of our religion. He was asked by a journalist. This is a very young religion, as you know. And we have the scriptures too, by the way. So we could come to your dialogue if you want to. He was asked by a reporter, what are you believing in? And so he gave articles of faith in 1844, I believe. And 11th was, we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may. So I think that's a very good ground for us to have this common dialogue. It is religiously justified in our religion, and we really believe in that. And I really like this approach that Pekka had, that why not talk about these things that are separate, because they're interesting. I don't know much about Islam myself. I was promised by Atik that he will send me a Quran, and the kind of Quran that I can trust, with some explanations as well. And I'm going to read that through. So that's my part. And I think in our religion, we have the same drive. Our leaders have been talking a lot about this thing. We have a pamphlet coming out right now about how should we think about our Islam brothers and sisters, right? Or something like that. So we have members, of course, like all of you, who disagree and who want to narrow the religion to something else. We had a discussion with our Catholic representative here that I don't think that's very healthy, to narrow our minds. We have to broaden the scope. And to do that is to learn more about things that are different, and then to understand why they are different. And when you really love one another, like you said, there's no way we can just punch each other on the nose, even though we are different and we believe in different things. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. This was great. All improvised, and you were like, oh, where are all the questions? You didn't need any. Hey, thank you all. We are like 8 minutes late, not too bad for us. You still have to wait just a little while because we have to thank people here. But hey, thank you, the lovely audience. First of all, the party is all about the guests. There's no party without people. So, just a moment. Today. We want to thank our panelists today. So, yeah. So we will start. Asakaram, please. A little something from us. You are most welcome. Please, there's paper outside. Pekka, please. You're welcome. And for the panelists and us, Laura Maria. Timo ja Kaima, ole hyvä. Thank you. Hey. Thank you all. Yeah. So some of you are coming back later on. We are now having a 2-hour break, about 1.5 hours, something like that. So we are continuing with a different kind of program at 6 p.m., between 6 and 8. So please jump back in. Thank you.